Stream is going. I've started recording. YouTube appears to be connecting. Something's happening on YouTube. And we are live on a Friday night at 8 o'clock. Welcome to episode 65 of Thompsin and Other Disappointments. I originally booked tonight's guest a few weeks ago, before all of the events of this week took place, and seeing Putin renege on his commitment that it was all just training exercises and that it was just the West being hysterical and so on, and now seeing the invasion progress and mature in such a disturbing and violent way, and appropriately or inappropriately enough, my guest tonight is a published author of a book, and he and I got chatting via Twitter, as I do with many of my guests, and the phone conversation that it spawned was around the sort of the recurring themes that come back to influence and to shift our political modes that we subscribe to in society, and indeed civilization itself. I thought he'd be a fantastic, fascinating guest to bring on tonight, because he's written this book, and I'll give you the name of it now. It's Postmodernity. Well, that's if I can pronounce the last word in it. It's Postmodernity and the Creation of the Anthropocene: How Our Current Period Evolved Out of History and Where It Is Going. And it informed the conversation that he and I had, going back a few weeks now, about Labour and Conservative and the dynamic between the two of them and the history between those two parties. But I suppose a lot of the themes within that book and within the conversation that we had could also be expanded around other nations around the world, and perhaps hopefully bring a bit of clarity to understanding why we are where we are and what the next steps are for Western liberal democracy. So my guest tonight, welcome to the show, Mr. Neil Pitts. Welcome.
Hi there, Aid. Thank you very much.
How are you doing tonight? Are you okay? You've got your milk and your tea?
I think I had a bit of long COVID actually, and I'm a bit exhausted. But I've done a massive script actually, about 5,000 words that I can draw on, and it's all about the history of British politics and framing that in the global situation, and then framing that against the history of human civilization. So I think I've got enough,
a lot to get stuck into,
to keep you happy.
Yeah.
Okay, the truth is that we were at Peter Simnel's College in Winchester in about 1989, and a group of us in my history class were just talking about if it was possible to write a general theory of history. And so I asked the teacher, I said, look, is there a general theory, of the whole of history, which we could talk about, which we could read, and it would help us out? And he said, no, it's not possible, because there are too many perspectives. And I said, well, so then isn't it just a case of resolving those perspectives mathematically? And he said, no, it's just not possible. So ever since then, I kind of had the clear idea that it was possible if the right material could be gathered. So I thought, right, okay, I'm going to get, do these college courses. And, I had some fun intellectual friends. We went to a lot of parties. We did a lot of fun stuff. We walked the dogs every day. We had lots of chats. So I had plenty of support. And when I went to the University of Leeds, and I thought, right, okay, this is really serious now. I've got to get the job done. So I was acting like a little spy, and I was talking to all the lecturers and talking about how they understood all the great theories, and for some reason this framework started appearing in my mind about how the whole of science had developed. And I was trying to explain how the whole of human civilization evolved through scientific theories, and from one civilization having superior science and technology, and they invaded the next one, so on, and they invaded the next one. But actually, what I found was that, and this is the funny thing about how the world works, which I was saying to you before we went on, is that what actually happened was I actually found out how it really works. And over time, it's like a transformation In terms of the periods of history, you've got the prehistory, you've got the ancient period, you've got the Middle Ages, and the modern periods.
Yeah.
And then you've got post-modernity. And now we're going to have the Anthropocene from about 2023. And really what happens over time is there is this great big like logarithm that transforms the way the world works over time. And that's what all these great leaders understand. And that's what most people don't understand. And that's what I was saying about the Labour and the Conservatives, about how we got into this situation where the leaders are they understand what's happening, but they're being pulled right and left by these global forces. So they're kind of managing it really. And that's what's maintaining a status quo.
So can we maybe like a
Sorry,
couple of working examples would be really helpful? Like, so we're talking about like what world leaders understand, but what the general public may not. Can you think of any examples, like maybe over the 20th century or possibly more recently, of where that sort of thing is evident?
Well, okay. What I say is that really it's in the way that the whole situation has evolved over time, and that's why people don't see it so much, because, for example, in the ancient period, these grammars evolved one period out of the next. So, for example, you had the first major civilization to unite was Egypt around 2700 BC. And then you had this little Sumerian society in Mesopotamia, which grew as it absorbed influxes of Semitic tribes coming out of North Africa, and it grew into the Akkadian Empire. And it developed, it got really, at one point, it became taken over by the Semitic tribes, and it became the Akkadian Empire. And then it was the Assyrian and Babylonian period.
Right.
Now, this became a huge center of global civilization, but perhaps not quite half of the world center at the time. But then it was taken over and conquered by the Persian Empire from the east, it's in the book about how the religions developed and the ideas within philosophy and science developed. And as they grew over time, these civilizations, they produced new religious and political ideas, which led to one group of people really kind of had a drive to conquer and become the new force. So Persia created a multicultural empire, which incorporated all the states like Judah, Babylonia, all these countries. And then they found themselves at war with Greece as they challenged the early Greek democracy. So Greek got taken by Alexander the Great, the empire there. And then after this Greek empire collapsed after invading Persia.
But then, sorry to interrupt, but so where these different civilizations have started and ended and been taken over and things have shifted.
Yes.
Is there a sort of what you were saying earlier about how you noticed a kind of pattern that was at play? Was there something that continued to kind of push these changes happening along the way?
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying, is that evolution is in the pattern. It's in that pattern because of the way that each took over the last. So in the ancient world, we can see this in quite a brutal sort of way. But actually, it's a lot more obvious. It's a lot easier to look at than it is if you look at the modern nations, where it's a bit more subtle. So you've got for example, after the initial early world order formed, the Mesopotamian empires were the biggest, and they had the big religions and the biggest empires. But then Persia started to absorb political and religious change in India and China, and they started to produce a new religion which spoke of the world as a battleground between good and evil. And they got it into their heads that they could win this battle by bringing the Assyrian Empire, who was oppressing them. Do you see what I mean? It makes sense in terms of the way that events were happening at the time.
So I think where I was getting a little bit lost there was, so in terms of where we're talking about these sort of shifts, and I was looking for like a pattern that might be governing or pushing that to happening. But I think it sounds like what you're saying is actually it is the change itself that of moving from pillar to post every so often that upends the civilization or the society or the governing political party. and that it's actually
Yes,
just
that's exactly.
a sort of natural mode that we work in, that every so often after this period of time has expired, then there will be a dramatic shift back towards another towards the other side of the table. Does that make sense? Have I understood
Well,
that right?
yeah. That yeah, yes, that does. Yes, absolutely. Yes, the change is in the way that events are happening,
Mm.
and so if I carry on from, okay, you've got the Greek Empire which collapses, then you've got Roman Empire, and the Roman emphasis on stability, and so does Han China in the east, and they're both about the same size. And the Kushan Parthian empires lie between them. And we have a big period of globalization, of trade increasing, because we have this stability. So stability is then eventually what exhausts the Roman Empire and leads to the migration of the Germanic tribes, which conquer it around 400. And in the meantime, you've got Christianity emerging
Mm.
from within the territories of the Roman Empire, and they want to convert really the Romans, because the whole problem with the ancient world is all these competing empires. So they just want to have like one monotheistic religion that covers everything. And there's a lot of importance in early Christianity, and in terms of the power of the church, which emerged in the first 1,000 years AD in
Mm.
Europe, became obviously the new force in Europe. So, so you've got the fall of the Roman Empire and the migration of the Germanic tribes across Europe, and then they are converted to Christianity by the Pope, who gets into Rome,
Right. Yeah.
and they convert the Franks, and the Franks create the Holy Roman Empire. So all of these events are all interconnected. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I see.
All of this, the whole of this, we've got this evolved now. And of course, what does every educated person in the world learn at the time? They learn about the way that events happened and the way things are going now. And what are we going to do as a government? How are we going to manage this? So over time, you've got this gradual development of the education system, and the universities appear around the 1200s. So you've got like a growing body of learning
Mm.
gradually turns into the modern universities. So you've got this history and the tradition of the way of managing and the way of governing operation is embedded in these seats of learning. So the Holy Roman Empire become the biggest thing in Europe, and then obviously the Mongols and Islam in the East. Islam is created in the East because they don't want to convert to Christianity. So they are different. How shall I put it? They're like a different set of tribes from the. They're all descended from Abraham, but the Jews are one side and the Arabs are on the other side, and they don't want to convert to the religion. They invent their own. So you've got Islam, then you've got also around 1206, expanding across Asia, and eventually they convert to Islam. So that kind of takes care of that side of things. But in the West, you've got this massive expansion of the Western European empires
Mm.
as they take over the whole of the Americas. And what happens to Europe's center is that the Spanish Empire becomes much bigger and more powerful than the Holy Roman Empire in the center. So you've got this war of the Spanish succession when the French take over the Spanish Empire, and the Holy Roman Emperor, who is married to the Queen of Spain, wants to stop that from happening. So you've got the beginning here of a series of wars within Europe over the balance of power, because the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor want to control the center. So, of course, through the modern period, then you've got the Europeans take over the Americas,
Mm.
and they create modern capitalism, and they create European imperialism. And for that reason, there's the Protestant Reformation within the church, and then there's the rise of these big political and scientific ideas, which lead to the rise of modern government. So basically you've got Britain, France, the Spanish Empire is pretty dead actually at this point because it's not really going anywhere, and Britain and France are competing for global dominance in the Americas and in India.
Mm.
And then after that, you've got American independence and the French Revolution. So if you follow the development of politics, the way that the sides of right and left have evolved to this point are really two sides of the same coin, aren't they? Even though we've sort of got an East and West evolving out of Africa, that from the early period of Mesopotamia, you've got the early Eastern empires, and then you've got the later kind of Western empires. So after about,
is it fair to say that, and I've sort of let you talk for like to get through the breadth of that, if you like, because I think it's really important to take people through the entire history of how these shifts and changes have taken place and how many of them there have been. Because I think when you go through the British state school education system, as I did, a lot of it is just kind of, World War II happened, and there were these guys called the Tudors before that, and then there was the Middle Ages, and you can make, in when you're 12, you can make a little Middle Ages fort or something, and then okay, great. Like when you come out at 16, you're like, well, I guess I know history now. But it's actually really important to drill some of this stuff into people's heads. Like there's so much stuff there that I either was not aware of or had completely forgotten took place. That it's super valuable to just get that quick refresher. I was going to say though, is it fair to say, because I recall something in our conversation that we had a few weeks ago, that where you have like the Conservative Party and then you have the Labour Party and you have these pulls to the right and these pulls to the left, is it fair to say that through the centuries that the pull from the right is to sort of go back to this kind of conservative with a small c, kind of almost a return to regal ruling, castles, kings, absolute power, and then on the left occasionally, like I guess now it would be every 12 years or so, there is then a sort of renewed appetite for progressive values, like come on, we need to take care of our own, we need to like invest in hospitals, education, like all of that stuff comes up flourishing again. And then once, I don't know, something else happens, then there's a shift back to traditional values and the Queen and flags. And could you talk a little bit about that perhaps?
Okay. Yes, I think, well, I know that the broader swings in left and right generally attributed to swings in global politics. So I will explain that, and I can explain the Ukraine crisis actually through this. In terms of the ideologies of the right and left in Britain, they both see themselves as the true way to create progress. That's it.
Right.
Became heavily divided during the period between the early modern period and the post-modern period, which is just about we're at the end of now. What happened was that because the Europeans took over the Americas, their form of capitalism was incapable of reform. It was well known, and socialism appeared because of it, and because of the failed French Revolution. Then a lot of the socialists moved towards communism when that appeared. And really the people on the right, the people in the church, they didn't see the point in this at all. That this was not the way progress was supposed to be created. Okay, in the modern period, you've got the creation of these massive European empires, and they linked imperialism with capitalism. So the money that came back from the colonies and the raw materials that came back were used to create jobs at home. Was managed in this. So people were starting to criticize capitalism for refusing to reform. We know that it couldn't because of the way that the situation was happening. But that criticism turned into socialism, and then it turned into the French Revolution, and then it turned into communism. By 1988, Karl Marx had written a critical appraisal of the capitalist system and what the problem with it actually was. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So this was well received, and a lot of socialists actually moved over to communism. So we have this massive polarization in politics, which obviously turned into the Soviet Union during the Cold War, the whole of the Cold War period, and yet still Western capitalism carries on, seeing itself as the way forward. Now, the reason for this primarily is because the USA broke away before the French Revolution and didn't have anything to do with all the problems that happened in Europe since then, or after 1776. So they actually solved the problem of the European imperialism by creating their own free trade country, with the laws, with the constitution, with
Right.
with the separation of the church and the state,
Sure.
and a free and fair system where everyone was equal. That was their ideology. So that happened before Europe then got into this massive situation with the revolution. So then that turned into Napoleon, and that turned into the Congress system of the European powers. And this is when the monarchy seized power again from Napoleon. And that's when communism appeared, when they realized the situation in Europe was not going to change, and that American independence was not going to solve the problem of European imperialism. So they started to oppose it, and then they started, the trade unions, they started to strike, revolt, and try to create constitutions in Europe. A couple of countries succeeded. One of them was Switzerland, and
It's funny, like
generally speaking,
the example I keep sort of coming back to, and I don't know if this will resonate with you at all, but it reminds me of an interview I saw with Tupac Shakur, the American rapper, where he's talking about poverty in a city, Baltimore, I think it was, that he was from originally, and he's saying, like, it's in response to accusations of African Americans like rioting and looting or something along those lines. And he says, well, it's quite simple, really. Like, if you're starving hungry and you go up to society's door and you knock on the door and you say, please, can I have some food? And then society just doesn't answer the door. Then on the second day, you're going to come back and you're going to knock a little bit louder. And then society still doesn't open the door. And then on the 5th or 6th day or 20th day, then suddenly you're there with a battering ram, like banging it down. And everyone else is saying, like, why are they rioting? Why are they looting? But it's the build-up, isn't it? It's the not being listened to. It's the disillusioning or disillusionment with society. So in his scenario, he's talking about poverty and African Americans and a deeply divided United States. But what you're talking about is not that dissimilar to that. It's kind of people feeling disillusioned with the status quo, like voicing their concerns in a sort of socialist kind of manner. Then when they're not listened to in that respect, it balloons into communism. And then I suppose from there on, you get into kind of like this country versus that country. Like, if you don't resolve these issues, they don't just go away, right?
Yeah. I mean, yes, and exactly, and it has ballooned into capitalism. But if you look at the way that it happened, it's more like communism sought to create an alternative which was self-sufficient and didn't trade with anything outside of itself, rather than being one country against another.
Right.
And that's the only reason, really, why the world managed to come through the Cold War period without nuclear going on, because the two sides were so mutually exclusive. And that's had a big effect on the right and the left in world politics worldwide. So if you look at the British system, the Conservatives represent the monarchy and the traditionalism, which all came from the money that those empires made and how it was reinvested and how it now works legally and ethically, etc., etc. But they represent the way that progress had to keep going, because if you think about it, then communism broke away and formed an alternative. What are the original people supposed to do in terms of capitalism? They've just got to keep the whole ship floating, haven't they?
Well,
So that's what they did. And
yeah, that, and also I feel like there's a sort of self-preservation, like, kind of, I don't know if protectionist is the right word, but there's if you're an earl or a baron and you've got chests full of gold and all the riches that you've managed to secure in your pursuit of capitalism, and then there's discussions about socialism. I guess you would be more inclined to align with that kind of right-leaning ideology, you know?
Yes, yes, and that's what added to the polarization in terms of human values, and that's what led to this real belief on one side or the other, that you were either a stakeholder in society and you were one of the king's men, or you were actor and vision to want to create an alternative because the system was not working for you. But the way the system worked had its own problems, and it created, like an inside and an outside. So either you're a loyalist or you get out. Really, there's space for traitors and dissenters in a monarchy. Is there? There's no space for an alternative anyway.
It's really interesting to hear you talk about the history of these things, because these are sort of archetypes or stereotypes that still are perpetuated today and persevere today. We don't have to comb too far or too deeply in the opinion pages of the Telegraph or the Mail to find those sort of stereotypes wheeled out. It's like, I mean, Boris Johnson himself has he was heckled by somebody a few years ago, and he turned around and said, like, lefty, I don't know if he said lefty scum or lefty tosser or something, but there's some real stink on the tongue when the right refer to sort of lefties as though they are savages and revolutionaries, and they all walk around in like Che Guevara t-shirts, and I suppose that all kind of goes back to this idea that they're not being listened to and that they have no choice but to upend the status quo.
Yeah, I think that the left and the right have a particular relationship which evolves over time, and that politicians on the left and right both their own understanding of this situation by using the common insult of the day. So the way that you insult your political opposition changes over time. My wife's father was the mayor of a town in Sicily, and he had a picture of Che Guevara on the wall of his hairdresser,
right?
Because he was a left wing, and this maybe what's attracted me to this to this subject. And he was there's a famous picture of him back where he comes from, of him cutting the hair of Pippo Baudo, who's a famous TV presenter, and in anyway, so the left learned their own ways of abolitionism from the right, and that the problem is really that the way that the whole left-wing thing works globally, it was all about workers' rights. When it was about the Soviet Union, when the Soviet Union was the top communist state, it was all about the problem with workers' rights and human rights. And now it's shifted to China being the top communist state. It's more about people politics. I don't know if you've noticed in Britain this shift to people politics.
Yeah.
And this goes back into, this is what I wanted to bring in with my history of the political parties in Britain, is the way that the situation has gone back and forth between the two sides. In other words, the way the situation is evolved with the right being connected to the imperialist capitalist world and the monarchists and the church, and the left being connected to the communists, the trade unions and the socialist movements. The right and the left represent different ideas, but the way that they changes differently as well. And that's what's actually produced the situation we have, or just had today in politics. I think the Ukrainian issue has very much reunited the parties and neutralized, I think, a lot of the fallout that's happened in recent years. But they will be seeking to rebuild their position as Labour and Conservative after that. I think they stop working together perhaps over this. The Tories go back to the old Tories who were part of the Cavalier movement during the English Civil War,
Right.
and the Whigs who evolved into the Liberal Party. That would be the Liberal Party we know. They evolved out of the Whig movement, who opposed and who purged the government of the Tories. So there was this like Sith Jedi relationship between the two parties, like in the first place. The
Right.
Whigs purged all the Tories out of government, but they managed to get back. The Tories then came back, and then they purged the Whigs. And what happened was then the Labour Party emerged out of the trade union movement around 1900. To cut a long story short, the Labour Party appeared around 1900 and took over the Liberals, who became kind of irrelevant because the trade, the trade union movement and the workers acquired the vote in 1884, and that meant that large numbers of people who couldn't for then got the vote, and a lot of them voted for Labour. So Labour became the primary party of the working classes. And then the Conservative Party then formed in 1912. So the situation has thus gone back and forth between Labour and the Conservatives ever since then, and the Liberals haven't had a single government. So the problem is then, what with the Russian Revolution in 1917, the Cold War creates the Soviet Union, and all the left all gets swung right out to the far left, doesn't it? And all the, so of course there's got to be a reaction within the right.
I see. Okay, so let me just play that back to you and just make sure I'm understanding correctly. So, the formation of the Soviet Union, because it subscribes to a more extreme flavor of left-wing politics, where it's all about the country, it's all about the common goods. It's not capitalist. There's not really such thing as private enterprise. Everything is about state-owned, state-run, blah blah blah. And because of that, and because that's so frightening to capitalism and to the status quo in places like Britain, then you have the Liberal Party, or the left wing of the Tories or whatever, are then sort of seen as, oh well, you're like them, you're communist, right? So then does that sort of propel them into political obscurity at that stage? Or
now they're applying that to the Liberals, and they're saying, oh, you're if you're not right of centre, then then you've got to go.
yeah.
And this is what monarchism's all about. And I've looked at this political spectrum that we have now, where you've got fascism, monarchism, liberalism, socialism, communism.
Yeah.
And there doesn't seem to be a centre to it at all. If you've got the monarchists are taking the centre, but what I'm thinking is, actually, this doesn't actually make them right wing. And the right wing are trying to make it look like the monarchy is actually a right wing institution, but it never was. It just evolved out of the situation which emerged out of the Middle Ages. Now,
I thought you were going to say it wasn't necessarily a right wing institution. It was more that it's just that people who lean right, and are conservative with a small c, and don't like change and don't want to upend. It's just that it was there and they didn't want to change it.
No. What I mean is that the monarchy evolved out of the Middle Ages before this great big polarization happened, and the way that modern politics has happened is polarized between the right and the left because of communism and capitalism, has therefore polarized the whole relationship between all the people in it. So can I just carry on a little bit?
Sure,
from the 19th? Okay, if you take the situation from the 1917 Russian Revolution, you've got the creation of the Soviet Union and the Cold War. So this automatically pushes Britain over onto the American side, because the big polarization really is between the Americans, who had already solved this problem with the way that Europe was doing things before it polarized, and therefore they cannot tolerate the communist argument at all, because it's absolutely nothing to do with them and they don't want to get involved in it. And so you've got all these countries kind of looking to America as kind of like a role model, for how to do things.
Yeah.
And them shifting towards America is actually helping to take pressure off the situation. So more free market economy is actually improving the wealth of these people. And then you've got a situation where the workers in the West have all this free time and money and leisure time. And actually it's solved the problem that communism was talking about in the first place. So that's the Russian workers that are getting left behind. And that's what ultimately led to the fall of the Soviet Union. But if you think about how this problem is deeply embedded in how the whole world works, then you've got the shift to China as communism is running its course in the East, and the shift to China now as communism works its way into China and starts solving the problem of there was a Chinese civil war between the communists and the nationalists, and because they were being invaded by Japan. So
Right.
they've got, totally different problems over there. And so what the communist system enabled China to do was to unite and defend itself and create a political economy which was sustainable against the Japanese empire, which had previously been backed by the European imperialists.
Okay.
So the Europeans were building up Japan, and Japan was probably about half the size of a European imperial power in the early modern period. So they invaded China. They created their own state there, and they were kind of exploiting raw materials, which Japan finds very hard to get hold of in those days. So the global situation polarizing means that it's moved entirely really away from the monarchy situation and the church. I mean, it was, if you think about, say, like the period 1000 AD to 1500, it's all about the church in Europe. It's all about the Catholic Church and the power of the Holy Roman Emperor. And then you've got the rise of these big European imperial powers. And really, you've got the church is desperately trying to hang on to Europe's center. And then you've got Protestant Reformation. So what I'm saying is that in the modern period, it was all about the European imperial powers. And then, the church got left behind. It got sort of isolated and stranded by the way that those big European powers created progress until they were just out of its control. And then in the modern period, again, you've got the polarization of communism and capitalism. So really the church and the monarchy are not so much on the right side or the left side. They're more on the capitalist side.
Right. I'm struggling to get my head around it because
Did you see what I mean?
Well, I can see how the church and the monarchy would be left behind as sort of institutions that benefited from a sort of bygone era, and then as these kind of self-governing European imperialistic entities sprung up and grew their empires, that the idea of having to subscribe to church ideology would kind of be like, well, why do we have to do that? Let's keep growing, let's become wealthy. I don't know how do you then fit the church and royalty into that sort of capitalist model there, where the European countries are succeeding along a kind of capitalist or like hyper capitalist kind of lane. So where does the monarchy and the church fit into that?
Well, okay. I mean, first of all, they managed to survive because of the polarization between East and West. First of all, because the West had the French Revolution and the monarchies took power after that necessarily failed because of the way that it all happened. And they've been clever in that sense that they managed to shut that down and they ruled Europe in the 1800s again. When really, if the world had been more united, they would have created political progress which would have led to a people's parliament in the first place. So first of all, you've got to consider the world is divided into between East and West initially because of the way that humans evolved out of Africa. So then you've got the political and economic and religious situation this has created as a new level of civilization, as a new period. And then you've got the way that the monarchies have managed the situation. The Russian monarchy resigned, actually, at the end of World War One. And they were overthrown by the Bolsheviks. The German Kaiser resigned after World War II. The Italian monarch got kicked out. The French got kicked out. There's only, I think it's Holland, Britain, Spain. There's only a few countries now left with a constitutional monarchy who've managed to survive by defending the government from rogue governments. Basically, by kind of that's all they do. Really.
That and the fact that they effectively gave up their power, right? So it's a nice little tale that we like to tell ourselves that the Queen could basically call Boris Johnson to Buckingham Palace and say, "Come on, you're not leading my country, right? So I will now get rid of you." But that would just never happen. She's a nice old lady, and I, as far in it. I'm not so much of a die-hard lefty that I would want the royal family strung up in the town square. I'm not that bad, but I don't think she's about as good as I would expect a monarch to be. But I don't think she has any power at all. I think if you look at the way that she's been treated and disrespected over the last 5 years, I think if she had any power, she would have stamped her feet and done something by now.
Okay, from what I've heard, there are still a few games going on between the right and the left. Like, for example, somebody said that all the right-wing Conservatives take all their money out of the country when there's a Labour government to help it to fail, because they want Labour to succeed. And another thing that I heard in the news, actually, was the Queen has the right to go through all the laws that are being proposed by the Prime Minister and actually reject them before they actually go before Parliament. That was something that shocked me.
Yeah, I'd like to read up on that a bit. I mean, if that is true, that's quite amazing, because I thought that the whole idea of having a constitutional monarch was that it was effectively to guard against those situations that we had seen in other countries where the monarch was effectively dragged out and beheaded. And here, you carry on.
Sure, but I'm just saying that there are a few games that are going on between the two sides, and that the right wing definitely have their own people. If you think about all the lords and the earls and the people in there and all the fox hunters, I guess, you've got the maybe the fox hunting Tories are the people, who are essentially in the cooking pot of these, these conspiracy theories. And then on the left, you've got the Labour unions, and you've got the people who are perhaps connected to communism, socialist movements, communist parties. You've got some real agitators and some real, people that actually want to stir up trouble in the news. So there are, to a certain extent, there are two sides still going on. But anyway, can I get to the final third, final third of the material that I prepared? Okay, now this is on the problem with the way the world works that has continued through history, through the modern period, through postmodernity, and people don't see it because of the way that it's happened. But global leaders do, because they're on that level where they actually have to know all this stuff. And basically, the Russian Revolution, 1917.
Yeah.
Okay, was actually started by the German government.
Right, like in a sort
of you know that?
Underhand way, or?
Yes, in a very underhand way, in the sense that this man who I've got, Wikipedia this, because there is actually a big article about this man, and his communist alias was Parvus, and he was a businessman who started an arms dealing company in Turkey, and he worked with the German ambassador to the Turkish government, because he worked with the Turkish government, and he persuaded him to give him an audience in Berlin about sending Lenin and all of that lot back into Russia with arms and money to create a Bolshevik revolution.
Okay.
And the Russian Revolution didn't actually spontaneously erupt out of the Russian people, as a lot of people believe. It
Yeah.
was actually set up entirely by the German government. And
But then how,
anyway,
like, do we know this? Is this documented? How because it seems
this
like,
is documented.
is it? I'm so naive and
You can
ignorant
get
for all
this
of this.
on Wiki.
Yeah.
Right. His real name was Israel Lazarevich Gelfand, and he is also known as Help Hand in literature on the Russian Revolution,
Wow.
because he was the initiator of the whole plot. Um, he studied he studied at Basel University. He was born in Belarus, by the way, um, but became subject to scrutiny by the Russian secret police for his Marxist views, and left for Germany, where he joined the Social Democratic Party and became friends with the revolutionary Rosa Luxemburg, who was a friend of Lenin's. And then Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht started the Spartacist uprising in Germany with Russian money once the communists had taken control of Russia. So that's what led to the rise of fascism in Europe. And
Wow.
that's what led to the wanting of the Western powers to create a strong buffer state in Germany against the Soviet Union. And the Germans got loads of support from the West in the
Yeah.
support in the form of bank loans. You know, the Nazis got funding, and they got steel, and they got vehicles. You know, supply Western, European, and US industrialists,
Mm.
not realizing that they were fueling this fire, which was about to erupt because of the polarization within global politics.
This is so like,
So,
it's so fucked, isn't it? Because like, not to go back to my GCSE history kind of stuff, but you kind of like, I mean, maybe I was taught this stuff and I've just forgot it since I left school, but my recollection of being taught the backgrounds to European wars is just that it was a bad thing that happened, and like a lot of the Germans were baddies, and then they, the Nazi Party were elected, and then a horrible war took place where a bunch of Spitfires flew across and the battle for Britain, and we won, and yeah, great, okay. Um, but it's the nuance and as you mentioned, like the sort of ugly industrialist angles of this, where it's like I mean, I don't know if they knew what they were investing in or what they were selling to Hitler's Germany or
they
whatever
would.
ahead of time, but it's
Oh,
quite, I can
yes.
totally imagine that sort of stuff happening, where they're just like, yeah, I mean, they seem a bit dodgy, but look here, they're going to buy like $1.5 million worth of this off us, and we sort of see echoes of that now in terms of like sanctions, like the conversations that have come out in the last couple of days about sanctions on Russia, where people are saying like, right, we need to implement serious sanctions, and then or like immediately you've got business leaders from like Italy and France and all across Europe saying, whoa, like, hang on a second, hang on. I mean, yes to sanctions, but like, our business is going to go under if you do that. So can we maybe we just hold back on sanctions? It's like the greed or the need for financial security seems to kind of, that always comes up first, doesn't it?
Okay, the West became polarized over this as well. That certain people were terrified of the communists. They saw the size of the Soviet Union and what they'd done to Russia. They'd overthrown the government, and they were scared about the possibility of a revolution, and particularly the Russians exporting the revolution. Now, they had obviously spies going on in those days, and the Russians were divided between Stalin and Trotsky to take over from Lenin. And Trotsky wanted to export the revolution, the permanent revolution, he called it, and the eternal revolution. And Stalin was the editor of the newspaper, and he wanted to build up Russia's position before they could be in a position to challenge anyone. And he won for stability. But for a while, people were scared of Russia literally just becoming a base for the revolution globally.
Mm.
And they did manage to successfully export the revolution to many states in Southeast Asia and in Africa, and especially dissatisfied former European colonies. So this takes us into the Cold War, doesn't it, period? And what's happened really then is that since at the end of World War One, you could say, yes, it was messed up. At the end of World War II, the UN formed to take the global situation away from the events which had dominated the early 20th century. So what you've got there is an organization which is encouraging the world to communicate and to not let that breakdown in civilization happen again. But if you want to look at the way that breakdown happened, really, it happened, okay, primarily because of the East-West divide, which had led to the Europeans obviously taking over a whole new continent, and this kind of destabilized the global political situation because it made it very one-sided towards the Europeans, which then divided between themselves into the capitalists and the communists. You could say that's what led to the Cold War. And in effect, that's made the situation very complex. But because the people in power understand this, it's under control. And that sort of brings us to today. I think people are thinking, okay, it's okay now, it's under control, because we've got the nuclear bomb and all that sort of thing. It's really serious. But then you think, oh, hang on a minute. Oh, because they've got it under control, I can't do anything about anything, can I? Ever, because it's all got to be kept under control. And I think that's the problem today. People have got today, and it's frustrating young people who are out in the streets protesting, about the fact that they don't have a voice and the fact they don't understand how it all works. And I think that's really what I found. Why I wanted to write this book in the first place was because I wanted to know actually what was happening. And I think people have got to do that first before they can do anything about it. People out there banging their heads against cars and throwing petrol. The situation works, but on the other hand, they've got no idea what they're actually implying by what through their actions. So, worldwide, there's people protesting all over the world about the way that it works, without actually understanding how it actually works. So I was thinking maybe if people did actually have an idea about, how it works, maybe then we could discuss how it works. But without that, you've just got the pros and the antis, haven't you? You've got the official government forcing and the anarchists and you've got the other people, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, it's almost something of a cliche now to kind of say, like, could we all stand back a little bit and just take a deep breath and then try to understand each other a little bit more, and to understand that there are extremes on both sides, and then try to work together. But I almost feel like the examples that you've so eloquently...
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me okay? I know the sound has been a bit dodgy.
Green.
Yeah, I think I can hear you again, Neil. I keep losing you a bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think I was just sort of saying that, as there are extremes on both sides, and we all sort of implore each other, like beg each other to look at the nuances and to appreciate each other and listen to each other. I don't know. Do you think we will ever get to a point where enough of the population are interested even in listening to, like, quote unquote, the other side, and understanding that there are different, like, that there's a reason why, let's say, your brother might go conservative or your sister might go Lib Dem or Greens, or and then actually coming together rather than just kind of mocking each other? Or do you think we're just always doomed to misunderstand and not really be interested in understanding each other?
I think the problem might be in each other, and actually we should all be trying to understand the situation, because the answer really is in the structure of history. Do you see what I mean? There is this this complexity to the way that events have happened,
Mm.
which means that post-modernity, the whole post-modern period between World War II and the present, has been characterized by the world moving from the problems which caused World War I and II. So in other words, to move beyond that. Well, what I'm saying is that can you hear me, Aid?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Okay. In the structure of the whole situation, anybody can work their way up and understand it and become a national leader if they want to. But the key is in this understanding the structure of the situation and the whole history of the whole situation, because the answer doesn't lie in the other side. The fact that the situation has polarized indicates that there must be a reason why that has happened. And I could say, honestly, that's what was bugging college, was that we did not seem to have the full story. No matter what we did, we couldn't get the whole story out of our education system because it only had half the story. Because our whole country was on one side or the other. So we've got globalization, we've got people really want to understand the structure of the whole situation. What's happening now with this Anthropocene is that scientists are proposing that we actually reclassify the way in which we see periods of human history by adding a new picture, a new piece, to the series of ages. So all the periods that we've had of human history so far have been in the Holocene, when Egypt became the first civilization to unite. And that leads all the way through all those civilizations through the world order into post-modernity. And now what we're saying is we need to entirely go beyond that, a much more objective perspective. And that's the shift which is currently happening now. So it will come out what has happened, all of what has happened. I mean, I managed to put it in a book, but in terms of government, in terms of the way we talk about life, in terms of the way that people relate to each other, is all coming now into a new humanistic. It's just that the problem then, what position will be in within that, bearing in mind the fact that the way the situation has had to work in the past. That's becoming the new issue. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I think so. I think I mean, it sounds to me like it's about sort of understanding a sort of a pattern style shift that takes place every now and then, and that period can fluctuate. That can be a lengthy period where an entire civilization might collapse, or it could be a shift from like a traditional conservative party to a Labour Party, and it's about understanding those shifts and managing them in as best way as you can, whilst also understanding that maybe on a broader scale things are gonna, like, I forget the names of the periods that you've mentioned, the postmodern period, and then we're going into the correct me, sorry, I've forgotten that.
The Anthropocene,
Yeah.
is an idea that was developed, it's being developed by geologists, and they're going to put this before the International Union of Geological Sciences next year, because I've emailed them to talk about it, ask them what they're doing. And what they're doing is they're reclassifying periods of human development into stages in which they've had an impact on the environment. So because particularly they want to prove the argument for global warming and climate change and all that sort of thing, they've got to argue that humans started off very slowly having an impact. But even as far back as Mesopotamia, farmers could graze whole valleys with their sheep and leave them barren and leave them uninhabitable. And that this has been building up. This effect that we've had has been building up over time. And gradually now we could wipe out the whole planet with our nuclear bombs. So what they're saying is that the structure of global society has evolved now sufficiently to say that we're entering a new age, this new human age, whereas before the structure of human history evolved in this subjective way. It evolved as the world, formed. And I mean, what I'm proposing in this book is that the implications of really postmodernity is that we have a problem then finding a way of going beyond that. What happens when the structure of postmodernity changes significantly enough in relation to the way that periods have evolved in general to constitute a new period? That's the big question there, because the way that postmodernity evolves must evolve at some point into something else, or else it would be postmodernity, which is a bit of a ridiculous concept. So the way that the way that scientists are addressing this issues now is what they're doing is when early humans evolved in the ice age cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah, the glacial cycles emerged out of the background of Earth history. So you've got these periods where it was actually North and South America joined together, and it cut the warm Pacific currents off from the Atlantic, and it meant that the Gulf Stream was the only thing that was warming the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah.
And this set in motion the cycle of glacial periods, which became known as the Quaternary period. Now, humans evolved within this period, and there are two periods of that: the Pleistocene, and then the Holocene is the period involving all the periods of human civilization. We must be able to see ourselves in this objective way now, because we've got satellite and we've got we've got television, we've got all these things that enable us to see ourselves as a species on this planet, and it now matters that we do that because of the power that we've got to upset the environment, and the need to take responsibility for our actions logically follows from the events of postmodernity. Do you see what I mean? No? In terms of the evolution of periods,
yes,
that there is a continuity.
Yeah, no, I think I understand. But I'm acutely aware that I've got to get back inside my house, Neil. I've got to run off.
Right.
But yeah, no, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We've been gassing away for a while. If anyone wants to check out Neil's book, and you absolutely should, it is called Postmodernity and the Creation of the Anthropocene: How Our Current Period Evolved Out of History and Where It Is Going.